Thank you very much indeed. Tremendous panel. And now we're into the home straight. You know, I like my track and field athletics metaphors. So we've been building up to this. So our closing keynote, Q&A as well, is going to be on delivering fair green growth with the Right Honourable Ed Miliband MP, the Shadow Secretary of State for Climate Change and Net Zero, who oversaw the introduction of the Climate Change Act in 2008. So Ed will give his keynote, and then he will be interviewed by Sam Friedman, who's just had a starring role in the previous session. And Sam will talk to Ed, do a Q&A. And then also he will be recording his Power Test podcast. I think the Q&A with Ed will be part of that podcast. Is that right? Is that right? Yes? Thumbs up? Fantastic stuff. So put your hands together and welcome our keynote speaker, the Right Honourable Ed Miliband MP. Ed. So, delivering fair green growth. Ed, tell us how it's going to be done, okay?
Thanks so much.
Fantastic.
Great to see you. Well, Henry, thank you so much, and it's great to be here. I'm not sure what I feel about being described as the home straight of a conference, because I'm conscious when I looked at the programme that I'm standing between you and the drinks reception, which maybe isn't a great place to stand, but maybe I'm the sort of light entertainment. I am the light entertainment, okay, of the afternoon. Look, can I just start by thanking the Centre for Progressive Policy for the invitation and for all its excellent work on inclusive growth. And I do want to particularly commend David Sainsbury for his work in championing progressive capitalism over many years. I was actually rereading his book in preparation for this event. His book was published 10 years ago, as many of you will know, and I would highly recommend it because it's incredibly relevant to today's situation. Let me start with an opinion poll. I'm not a great fan of opinion polls, given my experience of 2015. You may understand that. But I will start with an opinion poll nonetheless, which was, believe it or not, pointed out to me by Lord Cooper, who is the founder of Populous and was also David Cameron's pollster. He obviously did better polling than us. He offered people the statement, "It feels like the UK is going through a period of steep decline." I won't ask for a sort of show of hands as to what you think, what percentage you think people agreed with it and disagreed, but I'll give you the answer. 78% of people agreed with the statement, "It feels like the UK is going through a period of steep decline," and 5% of people disagreed with that statement. So that means that only 1 in 20 people do not think our country is going through a period of steep decline. I mean, I think that, I suspect many people in the room aren't surprised by that, but I do think we should find it shocking, and clearly it is a very bad state of affairs that we are in. And obviously this is determined by many factors: the state of public services, the cost of living crisis, some of the turbulence of the current government, putting it politely. But I think, and this is my theme, that at root of this is something much deeper, which is our economy is simply not delivering for many people and has not done so for a long time. Last week, the OBR confirmed that this Parliament will see the largest fall in living standards since records began 70 years ago. I suspect many people in the room know some of the other data. So in that context, I want to make the following argument to you. First, the reason for the failure of our economy has a particular character, which is the combination, which is particular to the UK, of low growth and high inequality. And I'll say something about that. Second, that the transition to a clean energy economy, which is the area of policy that I'm in charge of for the Labour Party, offers us a huge economic opportunity. And thirdly, I want to talk about how we seize that opportunity, and I want to argue that we can't do so without a very different economic strategy from the one we have at the moment, in particular through what we call emission-led industrial policy, and also to produce a different outcome, which is an economy that is more prosperous and more equal. And then I'll say something slightly partisan about the dangers if we shun this strategy. First, let me say something about the context. Our economy has many strengths, relatively high employment, world-leading companies from life sciences to professional services, and also some outstanding examples in my area in clean energy. But for too many people, that is not the story of our economy, as I think the steep decline poll rather suggests. I think about it from the point of view of my constituency, Doncaster North, which is an ex-mining constituency. It voted for Brexit by a very large margin. It didn't follow the advice of its MP. And I often say to people that this vote was much more about the economy and the way it works than most people realize. And in particular, that the mining jobs of the past, jobs that had big dangers, but also brought a regular paycheck, status, recognition, pride, have gone and too often been replaced by casual, insecure jobs. And for many people in my constituency, and I think across many parts of the country, the Brexit vote became a referendum on the insecure, casual, unfair nature of our economy. People wanted something different. And the truth that my constituents feel is correct. It is true. It's not perception, it's reality. The Resolution Foundation, in their excellent report, Stagnation Nation, and I think the final report is coming out quite soon, described what they call the toxic combination of low growth over the last 15 years and high inequality over the last 40, which has beset the UK. A couple of weeks ago, the IFS, another great organization, produced a report on the changing geography. I strongly rate, for the nerds amongst us, we're all nerds probably, no offense to the audience, I consider it a compliment, produced a report on the changing geography of UK jobs, about the hollowing out of middle-income jobs in our economy. And I really strongly recommend this report because it showed sort of where the hollowing out had happened, often in manufacturing, maybe not surprising, and disproportionately in the North and Midlands. So my constituents and millions across our country are at the sharp end of this economy. And the other point I just wanted to make in this first section is that toxic combination, as Resolution calls it, of low growth and high inequality is the backdrop to the crisis we've seen in the last 2 years. So 7 million people facing a crisis of energy affordability, the cost of living crisis, as everyone now calls it, the government spending £50 billion, I think, last year to try and protect people. Now, part of the answer to this is changing our energy system. So the drive, for example, to cheap, clean renewables and away from expensive fossil fuels. But my point today isn't about that. My point today is that the drive for clean power can also address some, not all, but some of these deeper economic challenges that we face. And I think the point about this, one way to think about this is and I think this is very much the theme of the CPP, is we need to hardwire justice and security into our economy and not simply seek to make it happen after the fact. So redistribution has a role, but redistribution can't make up for deep earnings inequality. And also people want justice and security at the workplace in all its manifestations, not just in terms of wages. So conditions, terms and conditions, working conditions, notice of shift work, and all of those things are part of the picture, I think, of the labour market that we have. I once memorably, infamously called this idea pre-distribution. Didn't catch on. People were not chanting, what do we want, pre-distribution, when do we want it now? But it is a, I didn't actually think they were going to do that, but just to be clear. But I think it is a kind of important, relevant, describes the idea. Look, this takes me to the second point, which is, well, that's all very well, maybe quite familiar to people. What's the role of clean energy in addressing these issues? So my case today to you is that the clean energy economy represents the best opportunity for the UK to confront the twin challenges of stagnant living standards and low growth. Just to give you some sort of context to this, the International Energy Agency, which is the most respected body on these issues, says that there'll be 17 million net creation of jobs by 2030 alone in the clean energy economy. Some people think, well, isn't America going to get all of these jobs? And I'll come on to America in a minute. Well, no, if there are 17 million extra jobs net by 2030, they're not all going to go to the United States, clearly. So I think there is a huge opportunity here for Britain to address the issues that I talked about in terms of my constituency in the country. And we've got proof of concept, in a way, from the Inflation Reduction Act, which is, as many of you will know, President Biden's big 10-year plan for public investment. Just to give you a few facts, I did an event recently with somebody from the White House Council of Economic Advisors about this. IRA, as it's known, has already helped produce over $600 billion in private clean energy investment, a near doubling of investment in manufacturing facilities since January 2021. And most interestingly of all, and I think I'll come back to this later on, more than 80% of the IRA investment has taken place in areas with below average college graduation rates. So, in other words, and this is because of the policy decisions that the administration made, they have directed IRA investment into areas that have previously been left behind and left out of prosperity. And this is a very deliberate decision, because I've talked to the administration about it, and we've tried to learn from this. And that's part of my argument for why this can address some of the issues that we face here. And I think this is maybe insufficiently recognized. IRA also is driven by an administration that is very different in character, economic character maybe, from the Clinton administration and even the Obama administration, because they are very explicit about the need for public investment as a route to economic growth, the belief in high-quality jobs and strategic sectors. The phrase industrial policy is sort of back in vogue in the US, at least as far as the administration is concerned. And also, they are explicit, the president is explicit, that to rebuild the middle class, as they call it, we don't just need good state-led policy, but strong organized labor that can bargain for workers. And it's to the great credit of my friend and colleague Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, that she has really enthusiastically embraced the lessons of IRA and put it at the center of our agenda, what she calls securonomics. And of course, and people often raise this question, we're not America, we can't lead in every area, but the opportunities in the UK are huge. We have extraordinary natural advantages like the North Sea, which has massive potential for offshore wind, carbon capture, and the hydrogen economy of the future. So the second point I want to just make is, first, we have this economic context, which we have to address, and it can't just be done through redistribution. And secondly, we've got this huge opportunity. So third, what are we going to do to take advantage of this opportunity and learn from the lessons of President Biden? And I want to suggest to you 4 principles about how we believe we should go about this task. The first principle is about clarity of mission and really focus for a government. And I think it's underestimated the extent to which Keir's 5 missions really, really matter, not simply for political campaigns, but for what will happen if there is a Labour government. Because he has said that one of his 5 missions is for a zero-carbon electricity system by 2030 as part of an acceleration to net zero. So it will be a big, big focus of the government. And this sense of mission matters. So it means that I know that if I'm the Secretary of State, the North Star of the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero will be 2030 zero-carbon power. That means using all of our electricity being generated from low-carbon sources. That also has an implication, which is we need all of the low-carbon sources at our disposal: onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, nuclear, hydrogen, carbon capture, tidal, not picking and choosing on an arbitrary whim. I met a former Prime Minister recently in the House of Commons. Before he left the House of Commons, he was the Mayor of London. I was asking him about his 24-gigawatt nuclear target. And I said, where did that come from? Because the CCC, Climate Change Committee, say 10 gigawatts. And he said, oh, do they say that? I didn't know that. And I thought, well, you're the man who set the 24-gigawatt target, so it's not great that you don't know that. I think that's what we call sort of evidence-based, policy-based evidence-making rather than evidence-based policy-making. So crucial for us is this sense that first, we will have this mission and we will have a clear focus on breaking down the barriers that the private sector faces to investment, from supply chains to skills to investment to the grid to planning. So all of the barriers the private sector faces, and we will use all the low carbon sources at our disposal. The second principle, but that isn't enough, just to say you've got a clear focus and a clear sense of plan in government, but we will have that. The second principle is that to achieve our mission, and this is where it gets to the kind of new thinking, I would say, and get the economic success we want to see, public investment and private investment must go hand in hand. So we want to challenge the old idea of crowding out and actually say that really what we can do is crowd in. The role of public investment crowding in private investment. I think that is the biggest single insight of the Biden administration. And the thinking behind this is that the vast majority of the building of the clean energy economy will come from the private sector. But billions of public investment has a crucial role in levering in tens of billions, hundreds of billions of private investment. And let me give you some examples about where the public sector can play a role that maybe can catalyze the investment from the private sector. Providing the infrastructure which can enable countries to compete, like modernizing our ports or building carbon capture and hydrogen infrastructure. Helping key industries like steel or automotive to transition to net zero, requiring investment in partnership with the private sector. Supporting consumers in the transition, for example, in the transition from gas boilers to low carbon or zero carbon heating. So that's, if you like, correcting for market failures, where the public sector has an important role. But then also, I think one of the other lessons from the Biden administration is that Joe Biden is unapologetic that he wants things made in America, not everything, but he thinks manufacturing and services and industry being located in the US really matters. And we too believe that. And we're not neutral about this. Now why does this matter? It matters because on grounds of resilience, and I think Russia's appalling invasion of Ukraine has reminded us of that question. It matters on economic and political grounds, because if we see the displacement of economically valuable production, sucking wealth and productivity out of economies, it leads to situations like my constituents often face. And it matters on ethical grounds too, in terms of not just secure supply chains, but those with the highest ethical standards. And so it's on the basis of that principle that we've shaped our policy agenda. So on the basis of this idea of a catalytic public investment. So we will establish, and I noticed it gets, the CPP calls for this in their excellent document from last month. We've said we will establish a national wealth fund to undertake the biggest investment in our ports since privatization, so they can accommodate the huge wind turbines and we can have more manufacturing here. Provide incentives and finance the private sector for electric battery factories, $2 billion investment, support our steel industry with a 10-year commitment to invest £3 billion to help it decarbonise, invest in new carbon capture clusters across Britain, from Grangemouth in Scotland to Port Talbot in Wales to Teesside in the Humber. And we'll also do something very innovative in the UK in terms of public policy, which is establish a new publicly owned energy generating company, GB Energy, and I wanted to say something about GB Energy and its thinking behind it. Our analysis is that those countries with a strong domestic national champion are the ones that have really reaped the benefits of clean energy jobs. So France has EDF, Denmark has Ørsted, Norway, Statkraft, Sweden, Vattenfall. Sometimes we have this debate in Britain, which amuses me, which is that we talk as if there isn't public ownership of energy in Britain. There is public ownership of energy in Britain. 45% of our offshore wind industry is owned by foreign state-owned companies. Because if you're Vattenfall or Ørsted or others, you think, oh, it's great to invest in Britain, hopefully. Maybe not so much in the last couple of years. But you know, so, and we welcome that foreign investment, but we think, well, we want GB Energy to be able to capture the potential of Britain's resources for the benefit of the British people. And so GB Energy will invest in the next frontier of clean energy like green hydrogen, floating wind, tidal power. And it will also look to partner with the private sector in more mature technologies for the benefit of local communities. And so we think that GB Energy, alongside the National Wealth Fund, can help play a really important role in creating clean energy jobs in Britain, and generate a return for taxpayers as we drive towards energy independence. That's the second principle around the role of catalytic public investment. The third principle, and this is an important lesson from the US too, is that the state has a shaping role, not just for how much the private sector invests, but crucially where it invests. And I think it's right to say that the economics of place is central to the problems of the last few decades and has got to be central to the clean energy economy we want to build. So when I say we should support steel and automotive, there's many good reasons for it, for our economic infrastructure. It's also central to many communities across the country. But I said earlier that the most striking fact for me from the US is where the investment had gone, so to those 80% of it to areas with below average college graduation rates, and this hasn't happened by chance, because the US tax credits provided have been directed to industrial areas and energy communities. And we've learned this lesson in our policy development. So we have a plan, something called the £2.5 billion British Jobs Bonus, which is about directing the tens of billions of private sector investment in clean energy infrastructure into particular parts of the country, oil and gas communities, coalfield and coastal communities. And the thinking here is quite explicit. We can't simply leave it to the market to determine where the investment should happen, because that risks furthering the geographical inequality, which is as much a part of the picture I described as anything else. And there is also a recognition in talking about this that we will be rightly judged on the justness of the transition for fossil fuel workers. I was in Aberdeen earlier this month alongside Keir Starmer to talk to oil and gas companies, workers and communities about our determination to make this transition work with and for them. And this is also about, and I know this is a theme of CPP's work, working with governments of our localities, regions and nations. The fourth and final principle of our approach, again learning from the US, is that we need the clean energy economy to deliver not just work, but high quality work with good terms and conditions. And here, again, I think the thinking has evolved, because the truth is it's clear from much economic analysis that the decline of organized labor, of unions, has led to casualization and insecurity and greater earnings inequality. According to an IMF study from 2015, half of the rise in income inequality that we've seen in advanced countries is associated with lower union density. And interestingly, as you think about the transition, one of the most salient facts about the fossil fuel economy is its high levels of unionization. Now, other countries have shown you can build a highly successful clean energy future with trade unions at the heart of it, and that is also our clear intention. And the expectation of companies, if there is a Labour government, is the significant public support we're offering should be accompanied by a willingness to embrace the role that workers and unions can play in shaping the future. And the truth is this, I think, that we won't address or change the deep and entrenched economic inequality we face, nor deliver a just transition without understanding the importance of worker voice and the role for trade unions. So these are the four principles that I think can help make the clean energy economy a model of the future economy more widely that we want to build. Government setting a clear mission and breaking down the barriers to its achievement, partnering with the private sector with catalytic public investment, directing that investment as a tool of economic justice, and insisting on high standards of wages and conditions with strong trade unions. And I'm absolutely convinced that the clean energy economy can become a model for a different kind of economy that we need to build in this country and help address the deep economic injustices our country faces. And this is just the start of our agenda. The point of our Green Prosperity Plan, ramping up to £28 billion a year of public investment in the second half of the Parliament, as we meet our fiscal rules, is to invest across the board in decarbonising our country in a way that will maximise the economic opportunities for Britain. From transport to public buildings, nature to home heating, I think there are huge opportunities for our country from this transition, and we intend to seize them. Let me say, finally, if this is our plan, I'm bound to ask, what is the strategy of our opponents? And I promise you it won't be too long, but I do have to say something about them. Look, they told us in the autumn statement that we have anemic growth stretching ahead of us, with a record of failure stretching behind them. And all they offer is more of the same. The response to IRA is so interesting. They claim Britain is leading anyway, and say we don't need the kind of industrial policy I've set out, even as the facts show we're being left behind, and as businesses are saying that. They shun the lessons of IRA more profoundly, saying it's somehow dangerous, which frankly clings to a failed neoliberal agenda. They refuse to recognize what every sensible economic institution, including the OBR, says, which is that the costs of not acting on climate are greater than the costs of acting. So in our view, theirs is the irresponsible and reckless choice. And they retreat from net zero, frankly, to the despair of business, the bemusement of investors, and the detriment of the country, and they double down on insecure fossil fuel markets instead. And I have to say, all they will do is consign the country to one more trip around what has been called the doom loop of low growth, high taxes, and crumbling public services. I profoundly believe that they are complacent, they are wrong, they are deeply dogmatic, and fundamentally, and this is a point I want to end on, they're unambitious for Britain. Because I started by talking about the mood of the country, and I began by suggesting that our country's problems are big, and that is true. But there's a bigger problem than the fact that our country's problems are big. It's that the politics of the current government are so pathetically small. And our approach is different. We intend to meet the scale of the economic and climate challenge our country faces. And I have to say, I approach these challenges we face not daunted but energized by them. There is huge intellectual energy, as I hope, and political energy, as I hope I've conveyed, across the world in the approach that I've talked about. There is hard economic evidence to back it up. And if there is a Labour government, we will have a Prime Minister in Keir Starmer who is enthused and animated by this agenda, and a Chancellor in Rachel Reeves who understands the opportunities that we can seize. Above all, and I say this about this room, we have businesses, civil society, and communities who do not want a climate culture war, but genuinely believe we can do the right thing by future generations and build a prosperous, fair, and secure economy. And I end by saying this: we owe it to the country to seize the chance that we have, and I look forward to doing it with the many champions of this agenda in this room and across the country. Thank you so much.